Welcome to Not Another Greek History Podcast, the podcast that aims to be exactly what it says. I'm your host, Onouphrios Dovlepis, and together we'll discover the not-so-frequently told stories of Greece's history that will change the way you view things forever. Hello, and welcome back to my podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking about something slightly different, something which people kind of ask me sometimes when they come to Greece and we do tours. Something about identity. So I'm going to focus on how we understand, how we perceive identity and heritage in Greece, and how mainly Americans perceive identity, or even Western Europeans, but mainly Americans, because this is the people that I get the most when I do tours. And also we're going to be talking about the example of the basketball player who is playing for the Milwaukee Bucks, Giannis Antetokounmpo, who was born and raised in Greece. In Greece, the idea of identity has always been tied to continuity, language, faith, shared memory, and a sense of belonging to the same historical community. When Greek heroes Kolokotronis or Makrigiannis spoke about the struggle of 1821, which is when Greece revolted against the Ottoman Empire, against the Turks, they rarely used the modern word nationality in the Western sense. Makrigiannis, by the way, is the statue that you see near the Acropolis station and the lower entrance of the Acropolis. It's someone who's dressed like a Turk. He's wearing a turban on his head. He's holding this very typical sword that you would identify mainly with the Ottoman Empire, with Arabic people, because everyone back then dressed more or less in the same way. So for those men, being Greek meant carrying the language of Homer and the faith of Byzantium, resisting centuries of foreign rule, and seeing themselves as the heirs of a homeland that never ceased to be theirs. In the United States, the story is very different. The modern American identity is built on the conquest and removal of the lands, indigenous peoples, and then on successive waves of immigration. Being American became less about ancient continuity and more about adopting civic values and pledging allegiance to a new political system. It is a nationality defined primarily by citizenship and the acceptance of a constitution rather than by language or millennia-old traditions. This contrast explains why, in Greece, debates about identity are so bound up with history, memory, and inheritance, while in the United States, they revolve more around pluralism and integration. In short, Greece looks backwards to define who it is. So where does Giannis Antetokounmpo, the basketball player, fit in all of this, in this broader discussion of Greek identity? In 1821, as I told you, leaders thought of Greek identity as continuity, the language, the Orthodox faith, and the inheritance of a homeland under foreign rule. Being Greek was a matter of shared history and struggle, not of legal papers. Immigration in Greece is something recent, mainly from the 1990s onwards. Mainly from the 1990s onwards, not from the very beginning of Greece's formation as a state in the 1800s, which, for example, is the case for the United States. So 1990s, Greece received mainly immigrants from neighboring Albania, a country also with a wide population, like Greece. That means that the Greeks were never used to many different nationalities and people of mixed race. Despite the fact that obviously there had been mixed marriages, that was not prevalent all around Greece. Only recently, non-white immigrants are more visible, especially with a large number coming from Asia, whether that is the Philippines, for example, or Pakistan, or also from Africa. Such is the case of basketball player Giannis Antetokounmpo, whose family is Nigerian. Born in Athens to Nigerian parents, who were also athletes in Nigeria, Giannis grew up in Greece but without citizenship until 2013. That is because being born in Greece doesn't automatically provide someone with Greek citizenship. Therefore, he didn't have a Greek nor Nigerian passport until he turned 18, and just a few months before the 2013 NBA draft. Finally, now he has a dual citizenship, of course. In interviews, Giannis has said, I feel 100% Greek. I grew up here. I went to school here. All my friends are here. But at the same time, I'm Nigerian too. This duality challenges the older continuity based view of Greekness, while at the same time echoing the American model where identity comes from belonging and participation rather than ancestry. Among Greeks, this has sparked debate. Many embraced him as the best symbol of modern Greece, hardworking, humble, rising from poverty to international fame. Keep in mind that the family is Christian. In Nigeria, roughly 43% of the population is Christian. That's why their mother chose very typical Christian names that we use in Greece, like Yannis, Kostas, and Thanasis. Others question whether someone without any Greek ancestry can truly embody Greek identity, showing how the older blood and tradition idea still carries weight. A very common thing to ask people in Greece, by the way, is where they're from. And I ask people sometimes that as well. I ask Americans, where are you from? And people tell me where they live. And they think maybe that this is what I mean. I never mean that. I mean, where's your family from? What is your heritage? What is your background? Obviously, I might ask you where you live, but I'm interested more in learning the history because Greece is always focused more on history, even personal one. When people ask you where you're from in Greece, as I told you, it doesn't mean simply where you happened to be born. It means where the family is from. Recently, he and his brothers played for the Greeks men's national basketball team, winning the bronze medal at the Eurobasket. In September 2023, which is precisely 2 years ago, actually, this is September 2025, Yanis had said,
Which part of your personality is more the Greek side, and which part of your personality is more the Nigerian side?
I think my values and principles probably my Nigerian side because whenever I went home, my parents are Nigerian, so we grew up in a Nigerian household. But sometimes the way I operate, it's a little bit Greek, it's a little bit European because I went to school. Most of my friends are, Greek and European. It's a little bit of both, but like Hakim, I don't know if Hakim was born in Nigeria. I think he was, but he represented the USA team. He never represented the Nigerian team, and I pretty much do the same thing. I was born in Greece. I represent the Nigerian team, but at the end of the day, everybody know the Greek team. But at the end of the day, everybody know that I'm Nigerian. I love the culture. I know the culture, and I actually had a trip with my mom this summer there for the first time, and to meet my uncles and aunts and grandparents and everything. So everybody know that at the end of the day, I'm African, I'm Nigerian.
in the United States, nevertheless, he came to be known as the Greek freak. Of course, there are people in Greece who say he's not Greek because he's not from Greece, but others said in order to practically oppose that argument that at least he's doing something important. Parenthesis now, this is where we see that a lot of people consider sports to be a basketball player as something which is a big deal, which my personal opinion is that it's not. But that's a different thing. So we can see that for some people, ethnicity, heritage, identity is considered to be in Greece as some kind of reward, as something that you're either worth being or you're not. Interestingly, ironically, I would say this actually comes from people who have a more open view of identity than those who say very strictly that identity is only Greek people whose families have been from Greece for hundreds of years, for example, and who are white. Without realizing it, I think they treat identity as a reward. Someone who doesn't do something which they think is important is not worth being Greek, whereas someone like Antetokounmpo or anyone else is worth it. Now, let me ask you something else. Let's ponder on this question. Do nations have the right to preserve their identity? One of the most difficult questions today is whether nations have the right to preserve their identity as much as possible, even if that means limiting immigration, which of course has been facilitated especially within Europe with the founding of the European Union. For countries like Greece, identity has always been bound to history, language, and tradition. The revolution of 1821 was fought with the belief that Greeks were reclaiming what was theirs after centuries of foreign rule. That continuity makes national identity feel like something inherited, not something chosen. Even the surnames in Greece usually show something about the person's origin. There's different endings, for example, for Crete, others for the region of Mani in southern Greece, others for Pontic Greeks, which is where the Black Sea is now, and that's where probably one of my grandparents' family was from, and that's why his surname, Kosmidis, which is a name that has to do with the Greek word cosmos, Kosmidis, it shows that the family was from the region of Pontus, which now is part of Turkey. The ending Idis shows the origin from that part. My surname, though, is actually Turkish. Because of the Turkish occupation, which in some areas lasted for over 500 years, some people acquired Turkish nicknames which turned into their surnames. So it doesn't show heritage, doesn't show origin in that case. So to answer Shakespeare's question, what's in a name? In Greece, a name contains history and heritage, showing even provenance, occupation, and more. We also have some Western European surnames, which date back to the 1200s, when the Crusaders occupied Greece, and also some Albanian surnames, because the Turks brought many of the Albanians to Greece since they were very good warriors. Some Albanians became Muslim and worked with the Turks and fought the Greeks. Others converted to Christianity, so they fought with the Greeks against the Turks and could eventually stay in Greece, were allowed to stay in Greece when Greece became independent. So nowadays, none of them considers themselves to be even remotely related to Albania. Likewise, in the United States, some surnames show provenance, like Quentin Tarantino's surname. Obviously, Tarantino shows heritage from not just Italy, Sicily specifically, because Taranto was an ancient Greek colony. So it shows more than just heritage. You can see how much is actually in that surname specifically. Or then you have some black people's surnames which indicate that their ancestors were slaves. Those surnames show history. Despite the mixes that occurred in Greece over the centuries, there are people nowadays with a very high percentage of Greek DNA, which could even be up to 90%. And that's why generally it's not very common to see in Greece natural blondes or many blue-eyed people or red-haired people or really white people like the people that you might see in Northern Europe, for example. The majority has dark hair, dark eyes, and olive skin. Not to mention religion. The percentage of Christians in Greece is at least 93%. The number was even higher, but Greece has been getting mainly Muslim immigrants, if you think about the places that I mentioned to you. So it seems that the Christian percentage is diminishing. It's not really diminishing. We're getting more Muslims, even though people might not be going to church as much as they did, of course, in the past. Officially, the Christians are practically that many. In contrast to Greece, the American model was built on a very different foundation. It is a country born from the displacement of indigenous peoples, which usually is forgotten, I see, by some Americans. Others mention them to me quite a lot, and I'm really, I wouldn't say I wouldn't say I'm happy, I wouldn't say I'm proud when I hear that. But okay, let's say I'm happy that people recognize them. And then, of course, the United States was shaped by wave after wave of immigrants, including, of course, many Greeks. Some Americans of Greek heritage, by the way, just to mention that, would be, for instance, comedian Tina Fey, actor John Aniston, the father of Jennifer Aniston, director John Cassavetes, author George Pelecanos, actress Betty White. Keep in mind, I'm talking about Greek heritage. Some entirely Greek, some partially Greek. So don't be confused. Betty White, obviously, that name and surname doesn't show Greece, but there is a connection. Director Alexander Payne, actor Ralph Macchio from Karate Kid, actor John Stamos, as you say in the United States, but it's John Stamos, actress Rita Wilson, again, the surname doesn't suggest Greek heritage, actor Zach Galifianakis, but you say Galifianakis, but it's pronounced as Ra in the beginning, Galifianakis. Actress Nia Vardalos, known from My Big Fat Greek Wedding trilogy, as well as some mobsters. That was a big thing in the past. In the US, being American does not depend on speaking one ancient language or belonging to one religion. It is about citizenship, civic participation, and shared values. The price of that openness, however, is that American identity is often vague, not tied to thousands of years of history, but to a political system. The United States often praises its identity as a melting pot. Americans always tell me that we're a melting pot, or we're mutts, people tell me. So it's a place where anyone, no matter their race or origin, can belong so long as they embrace its ideals, and that, of course, is amazing. The rhetoric, to use a Greek word, by the way, is really strong: inclusiveness, equality, opportunity. But in practice, there's a persistent tension between what is said and what mainly Americans, like Black Americans, for example, and Indigenous people, have experienced and are still experiencing: systemic racism and inequality. Black Americans face lower average incomes, higher incarceration rates, poorer access to healthcare, and educational disparities. I'm just going to say that because it is a TV show that anyone can watch, the one about Dahmer, the killer, as part of Monster, the TV show which focuses on different killers. When he was arrested and the police interviewed him, they said to him, "You chose to stay in that neighborhood, which is a black people's neighborhood, and the main neighbor in the whole thing is, of course, a black lady." And an amazing actress, by the way, Niecy Nash, who played the role of the neighbor, Glenda Cleveland, and she should have won as many awards as possible. She totally nailed it. She was amazing in that role. Anyway, the police told him, "You chose to stay in that neighborhood because it was a black community and you knew that the police would kind of leave you alone as the only white person in a black neighborhood." So when the moment came, and if you watch the whole thing, there's this moment when a child who is of Asian descent, Konarak, that's his name, he is found outside the house of Dahmer, and the neighbors, who are black, call the police. The white policemen who arrive, they meet with Dahmer, and he says he's my boyfriend, and they don't check that he's actually 14 years old. So you have the police disregarding completely the non-white neighbors. So I'm seeing this as a very good example where white people practically got away with something like that. Both the policemen, because they were not punished, and Dahmer, who continued to get away with things like that. What about the Native American, First Nations, Alaska Native, or Native Hawaiian communities? They have endured displacement, broken treaties, loss of land, cultural suppression. The number of indigenous peoples in high political office remains very low. There has never been a US president of indigenous heritage, and yet they were the people who lived in that part of the world in the first place. There have been 14 black US senators in the entire nearly 232-year history of the Senate, but 3 were appointed, not elected. By the way, I hope I haven't gotten any numbers wrong. I tried. It's been a while since I started researching this whole thing, but I did some research, I can tell you that. As of the latest Congress, so that is up to 2025, there is 1 Native American senator. For black senators currently, there are several. Raphael Warnock from Georgia, Cory Booker from New Jersey, and others, but still far fewer in number compared to their share of the US population. Barack Obama now became president in 2009, but he's of mixed origin. He looks black, of course. You wouldn't say he's white, but he's of mixed origin. His mother was American with European ancestry, and his father was from Kenya. Therefore, he is the first multiracial president, the first non-white president, and the first president born in Hawaii, actually. Why this matters to the question of national identity. In Greece, Greek identity historically comes from language, as we said, faith, which is of course Christianity and Orthodox Christianity specifically. It also comes from descent, revolution, continuity. The idea is you belong by virtue of that heritage. The US model says identity is more about what do you do, citizenship, as we said, participation, than where your ancestors came from. When large numbers of people from certain backgrounds, like black or indigenous, continue to face barriers, it reveals that ideals of inclusiveness can coexist with exclusion in practice. Some argue that it's unjust for identity to be diluted by mass immigration or reduced by policies that ignore deep heritage. They believe there is value in preserving a long continuity of culture, language, ancestral memory. Americans usually praise when they see things that have to do with traditions, whether that is on the buildings, whether that might be the way people talk, or the way people dress, or the what people eat, and so on. Others argue that a rigid identity based on race, origin, or religion can become exclusionary, that it risks stigmatizing, to use another Greek word, those born outside the tradition or who don't meet heritage tests. They see the US model, imperfect as it is, as more inclusive in principle, and it is. That's true. What about the connection to the media and film world? In recent years, media and film industries have increasingly cast actors of different races in roles that historically or traditionally would have been portrayed as white or tied to a specific other ethnicity. That is because non white actors had very few opportunities. But the debate becomes sharper when it comes to historical figures or characters with very clear cultural identities. A famous example is Netflix's portrayal of Cleopatra with a black actress. I've talked extensively about this. I'm not going to do it again in the episodes that I did about Cleopatra. Long story short, Cleopatra was a Greek queen of Egypt, but Greek queen of Egypt. To many historians, this casting felt like a rewriting of history for modern political purposes. Defenders of the choice argued that representation matters more than strict historical accuracy. I think the examples that I gave would have been maybe that if I portrayed Barack Obama or Confucius or one of the indigenous people who met the Western Europeans, for example, what would that have looked like? How could have this been perceived? The same debate appears in the world of fiction. In new stage productions and adaptations of Harry Potter, some characters have been played by black actors. Since they are fictional characters, some argue that race shouldn't matter at all. Creators feel pressured to check diversity boxes even if it doesn't fit the author's original portrayal. J.K. Rowling, who wrote Harry Potter, expressed concern that changing Snape's ethnicity would go against her carefully crafted character descriptions and could alter the emotional weight of the story. This is her saying that the production seemed to focus more on meeting modern diversity goals than on preserving the integrity of her original narrative. Keep in mind, this is the author writing this, and this is her creation, this is her characters, this is her world, this is what she came up with. So I would say her view on all of this really, really matters. This is tied to the broader question of identity versus inclusivity. In the US, where identity is civic, as we said, not rooted in ancient continuity, casting can more easily be reimagined. The idea being that any person can be anything. In countries like Greece or China with a deep historical identity, altering the racial or ethnic background of historical figures can feel like erasing a people's connection to their own past. What is undeniable is that media and film are not just entertainment, they shape how the next generation perceive history and culture. And I can tell you for sure, when I watched, I cannot remember which film that was. It was a film about, what was it? Elizabeth, maybe the queen of one of the queens of England. Anyway, Elizabeth Victoria. I'm not sure which one it was. One of her advisors was black in the movie, and I thought, oh wow, that was really impressive. How progressive for her back then to actually hire someone from Africa, probably, as an advisor, because okay, who knows how much this could help her in whatever she had in mind. And then I looked the actor up. Of course, I always check who's playing the roles. I want to know all that stuff, and I also checked the character that he played and the photo. Let's say the painting, anyway, the portrayal that came up online was of an old white British guy. And I was like, okay, that is a clear example of how a movie could have changed the way that I perceive history. A casting choice today may become a fact in the imagination of millions tomorrow. So, should nations protect themselves from becoming like America, where ethnicity and history play little role? Supporters of this view argue that without preservation, unique cultures may dissolve into a global sameness. Languages could fade. It's happening with Greek. I see it every day. People speak more English by the day. More companies, more businesses choose foreign names. Traditions could be forgotten. A lot of people in Greece no longer drink the coffees that we usually drank in Greece. And it's not a long time ago. I'm not talking about 100 years ago. I'm talking about things that I learned growing up, and I'm only 40 years old. Opponents, on the other hand, because keep in mind, I'm doing an episode to present both sides on all of this and also to explain countries like Greece. And this is more like also an episode for Americans to see the whole thing in a different way, not to change their minds, but I'm talking about visiting other places and not comparing everything necessarily right away to what we know, what our country is like, whether that is Greece or the United States, and so on. So, on the other hand, some people argue that closing off to immigrants risks isolation, stagnation, and a kind of cultural fear that prevents societies from adapting to new realities. Because, of course, the world is changing, and no one can deny that. Of course, things change, heritage changes, customs change, everything changes. It doesn't stay the same. I'm sure if the Greeks from antiquity saw us nowadays, they would freak out because our religion has changed drastically. They worshipped the 12 gods, that is the name of the religion, of course, in antiquity, like Zeus, Athena, Aphrodite, Hermes, and so on. Whereas nowadays we are very devout Christians, and we said Greece is one of the most Christian countries in the world. So, of course, religions change over time. Races also might change. So, for instance, our neighboring Turkey, the Turks, were very different people hundreds of years ago, coming from Asia, from places which are really close to Mongolia. When we see depictions of Turkish people from 800 years ago, 900 years ago, 1,000 years ago, they look Chinese. And yet, nowadays, the Turks have changed over time by mixing with people that they occupy, like the Greeks, the Albanians, the Serbians, Croatians, Bulgarians, and so on, Egyptians as well, and they look Mediterranean. The truth may lie somewhere in between. Nations like Greece may feel a special duty to protect their long history and culture, but at the same time, they exist in a globalized world where encounters with outsiders are inevitable, not only through immigration, like workers, not only in that sense of immigration, because we also get people moving to Greece from England, from Germany, from the Netherlands, because people sometimes want to live in a better climate. So you have, let's say, this kind of immigration on the islands in Greece. The American example shows the strength of diversity, but also the cost of building an identity with less historical depth. The Greek example shows the strength of continuity, but also the difficulty of reconciling that with modern immigration and change. The Greeks, I always say, struggle with change quite a lot. The Greeks feel sometimes stifled by this identity, drown sometimes in history and tradition. It's a struggle. We haven't, and I see that every day, we haven't really learned how to reconcile the past and the present. And sometimes we allow the past to destroy the present. We sometimes, I always think that this is what we do. We underestimate ourselves nowadays. We diminish ourselves nowadays because we cannot live up to what the past was. In the end, the question is not only whether nations have the right to protect their identity, most would agree they do, maybe, but whether they can do so in a way that keeps them alive, not frozen, and still open to the world. Thank you all for listening to my episode. I hope you liked it. I would like to read your comments, so take the time if you want. Obviously, leave a comment and let me know about this. If you listen to the episode and we meet finally in Greece, let me know your thoughts. I would like to hear them. What do you thought before you listened to the episode? And what do you think now after listening to it? So thank you all for being here. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share. Until next time, this is Onoufiros Dovletis signing off from Not Another Greek History Podcast.